Hey there. Tonight you're drifting back to a time when the ocean held secrets only a few could read, when medieval merchants risked everything on treacherous journeys, and when survival meant understanding both the language of waves and the dangers of human greed. It's the year 1287, and you're about to witness something extraordinary. While European traders counted coins with suspicious fingers and watched shadows for bandits, halfway across the world, Polynesian navigators were reading the ocean like you read a book. They didn't need compasses or maps. They had something far more profound. So, dim the lights, settle into your most comfortable position, and let your breathing slow. Tonight's journey takes you from the crystal waters of the Pacific Islands to the muddy, dangerous roads of medieval trade routes. You'll meet Kaimana, a young Polynesian navigator whose fate becomes intertwined with European commerce in ways no one could have predicted. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Are you tucked under warm blankets? Perhaps you're winding down after a long day. Whatever brought you here tonight, you're about to discover a forgotten chapter of history they never taught you in school, a story of waves, wisdom, and the deadly world of medieval trade. Close your eyes now. Feel yourself drifting back through centuries to a small island where your story begins. You find yourself on a volcanic island in the South Pacific, where morning mist clings to emerald peaks, like silk scarves forgotten by the gods. The year is 1287, and you're watching a young man named Kaimana sit cross-legged on wet sand, his palms pressed flat against the beach, as dawn breaks purple and gold across the horizon. He's been here since the stars were bright, feeling the ocean's pulse through the earth, learning to read messages that travel thousands of miles through water and stone. His grandfather, old Makoa, stands beside him, with eyes closed, feet planted wide in the shallow surf, teaching him to feel what cannot be seen. The ocean speaks in 3 languages, Makoa whispers, his voice barely louder than the gentle lapping of waves. There are the swells that travel from distant storms, the waves that bounce off islands like echoes in a canyon, and the currents that carry the memories of lands beyond the horizon. You watch as Kaimana nods slowly, his fingers spreading wider on the sand, feeling vibrations that most people would never notice. In the distance, outrigger canoes rest like sleeping birds, their hulls decorated with patterns that map the stars. This is where your journey begins. Not with maps or compasses, but with the ancient art of reading the ocean's own handwriting. A skill that will soon save lives in places where medieval merchants count their coins and fear the darkness between towns. You watch the morning lesson continue as Makoa leads you and Kaimana to a special hut near the shore, its walls woven from palm fronds that whisper secrets when the wind passes through. Inside, hanging from the ceiling, is something that would mystify European scholars: a stick chart, a map made not of ink and parchment, but of bamboo strips and cowrie shells tied with coconut fiber. This is how we carry the ocean in our hands, Makoa explains, running his weathered fingers along the curved sticks that represent wave patterns, not land masses. The shells mark islands, but the real magic lies in the spaces between, where bent bamboo shows how swells bend and reflect around land that might be days away. You lean closer, fascinated by this 3-dimensional representation of liquid physics that no medieval mathematician could conceive. Kaimana traces the patterns with reverence, memorizing not coastlines, but the behavior of water itself. You're European traders, Makoa says, though he's never met one. They fear the open ocean because they see emptiness. We see highways written in foam and current. Outside, you hear the village awakening, children laughing, women preparing breadfruit, men checking fishing nets. But in this quiet hut, You're witnessing the transmission of knowledge that predates written history, a navigation system that reads the ocean's moods like a mother knows her child's dreams. You follow Kamana as he ventures alone to the island's windward side, where waves crash against black volcanic rocks with a violence that would terrify medieval sailors. But you notice he doesn't flinch. Instead, he sits on a smooth boulder and begins counting, his lips moving silently as he tracks the rhythm of the swells. 7, 8, 9. A larger wave crashes, sending spray high into the air, where it catches the sunlight like scattered diamonds. The ocean breathes in patterns, he murmurs to himself, remembering Makoa's teachings. You realize he's reading the sea's tempo, understanding that swells travel in sets, that there's mathematics in the chaos. A frigate bird circles overhead, its forked tail cutting the sky, and Kamana watches its flight path carefully. These birds, he knows, fly straight to land when returning from sea. Another navigation tool that requires no instrument but observation. As the sun climbs higher, painting the ocean in shades of jade and sapphire, Kamana pulls out a small gourd and drinks fresh water, savoring it slowly. Where he's going, where fate will take him, water will become more precious than the gold coins that medieval merchants kill for. You see him stand, stretch his arms wide to feel the wind's direction on his skin, every nerve ending a compass point, every sensation a piece of navigation data that European sailors would desperately crave but never understand. You're pulled from your observations by the sound of urgent voices. A delegation of strangers has arrived on the island, their pale skin already reddening under the tropical sun. These are Portuguese traders, their ship anchored in the lagoon, and they speak through a translator about needing a guide for a journey unlike any attempted before. They want to establish a trade route that connects the Pacific wisdom with European commerce, carrying precious spices and goods through waters where their compasses spin uselessly. The village elders gather in the meeting house, and you watch as Kamana is summoned, his navigation skills already legendary despite his youth. The lead trader, a man named Alfonso, with a beard like rusted wire, spreads out his parchment maps on the woven mat floor, but the Polynesians politely ignore them, seeing only dead drawings where living knowledge should flow. "We need someone who can read the ocean," Alfonso says through the translator. "Someone who can guide us through waters where stars hide behind clouds and storms change everything." You sense the weight of this moment, two worlds of navigation colliding, one based on instruments and fear, the other on intuition and respect. Kamana's grandmother touches his shoulder, whispering a warning about the diseases that follow these pale strangers, about their hunger for gold that makes them blind to the ocean's warnings. But destiny has its own currents, and you can see in Kamana's eyes that he's already decided. You witness the preparation for a journey that will bridge oceans and centuries, as Kamana packs not with maps and instruments, but with memory and instinct. His mother weaves him a special cape from the finest tapa, embedded with prayers and patterns that tell the story of their ancestors' voyages. The Portuguese watch in bewilderment as he refuses their compass, instead filling a small pouch with different types of sand from various beaches, each one a memory trigger for the islands they represent. "How will you navigate without instruments?" Alfonso asks through increasingly frustrated translations. Kamana simply points to his eyes, his hands, his heart. You understand what the Europeans cannot, that his body itself is the instrument, calibrated by years of training to read signals they don't even know exist. The village performs a farewell ceremony as the sun sets, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and violet. Old Makoa presents Kamana with his most precious possession, a small piece of carved jade that supposedly holds the memory of 1,000 successful voyages. Children place flower leaves around his neck until he can barely see over them, their fragrance a last reminder of home. You feel the weight of what's beginning here, not just a voyage, but a collision of worlds, where medieval European commerce will meet Pacific navigation wisdom, where the fear-driven trade routes of one culture will intersect with the ocean reading skills of another. You board the Portuguese carrack at dawn. its hulking wooden form so different from the elegant outriggers Kaimana knows, and immediately you sense his discomfort with how this vessel fights the ocean, rather than dancing with it. The ship creaks and groans with every swell, its square sails catching wind clumsily while 30 Portuguese sailors scramble about their duties, suspicious eyes following the young Polynesian navigator who carries no charts. Below deck, you discover a cargo hold filled with dangers medieval traders know too well. False-bottomed chests for hiding true valuables, weapons for fighting pirates, and bags of coins from different realms, many counterfeit, that merchants must constantly verify. Alfonso shows Kaimana the standard navigation tools, an astrolabe, a cross-staff, hourglasses for measuring time, but the young islander politely sets them aside, instead climbing to the crow's nest, where he can feel the ship's movement without interference. The ship is sick, he tells Alfonso that evening, causing alarm, until the translator explains he means the vessel doesn't know how to listen to the water. You watch Kaimana tie small strips of cloth to various parts of the rigging, creating his own wind-reading system that makes the Portuguese navigator scowl with professional jealousy. As night falls and the European sailors huddle below deck gambling with loaded dice, another danger of medieval commerce, Kaimana remains above, learning this foreign vessel's rhythms, teaching it to speak with the sea. You wake to shouting and chaos as the ship encounters its first major storm, 3 days out from the island, and while the Portuguese sailors panic and pray to saints, Kaimana remains eerily calm, reading the storm's patterns like a familiar text. The waves tower above the deck, green, black mountains of water that would terrify any medieval merchant who'd only known river barges and coastal traders. But you notice, Kaimana isn't looking at the waves. He's watching the intervals between them, feeling the ship's response, understanding the storm's rhythm in a way that transcends fear. Turn the ship 3 points starboard, he tells Alfonso with quiet certainty, and though the Portuguese captain's own navigator protests violently, something in Kaimana's eyes makes Alfonso give the order. The ship groans as it adjusts course, and suddenly the ride smooths slightly. They're now working with the storm swells rather than against them. You realize this is what Makoa meant about reading the ocean's handwriting. Where Europeans see only chaos and divine wrath, Kaimana sees patterns and pathways. Below deck, ceramic jars of precious oils have shattered, their contents mixing with seawater and creating a slippery danger that has already claimed 2 sailors' bones. The medieval world's commerce is fragile, you understand, dependent on fair weather and divine providence, while Kaimana's people have learned to read storms like merchants read ledgers, with careful attention to every detail. You emerge from the storm into an eerie calm that makes the Portuguese sailors even more nervous than the violence did, their medieval superstitions filling the silence with whispered prayers and signs against evil. The sea has turned to glass, reflecting clouds so perfectly that you feel suspended between 2 skies, and the ship sits motionless, as if frozen in crystal. Alfonso paces the deck, calculating how much fresh water remains, knowing that medieval sea journeys often ended not in storms, but in the slow agony of thirst. But Kaimana reads different signs. He notices the particular color of the clouds on the horizon, the way certain seabirds circle without landing, the subtle ripples that disturb the mirror-like surface. "Wind comes before sunset," he announces with certainty that amazes you, given that not even a breath of air stirs currently. The Portuguese navigator sneers and points to his instruments that show only dead calm, but Kaimana begins preparing the sails anyway, adjusting them for wind that doesn't yet exist. You spend the afternoon learning from him about the doldrums, these spaces where the ocean rests, and how Polynesian navigators use them to study the star's reflection in still water, creating a double sky that helps with navigation. As predicted, just as the sun touches the horizon, A breeze springs up from exactly the direction Caimana expected, filling the sails and carrying the ship forward, while the Portuguese crew stares at him with a mixture of awe and suspicion.
You witness the first real test of trust, when Caimana insists on changing course dramatically, steering away from the Portuguese navigator's carefully plotted route toward what appears to be empty ocean. The argument that erupts would be comedic if the stakes weren't so high. Lives and fortunes hanging on whether to trust centuries of European navigation tradition or the instincts of one young islander who claims the swells are telling him about land beyond the horizon. Alfonso stands between his navigator and Caimana, sweat beading on his sunburned forehead as he weighs medieval commercial pragmatism against something he doesn't understand. "There's an island," Caimana insists, pointing toward what looks like endless water. "The waves tell me. They bend around something we cannot see." The Portuguese navigator throws his precious charts on the deck in fury, declaring this madness, reminding everyone that ships full of gold have been lost following primitive superstitions. But you notice something. Some of the younger sailors are watching Caimana with growing belief, especially those who saw him predict the storm's path and the wind's return. As Alfonso finally decides to trust the islander, giving the order to change course, you feel the ship's destiny shifting, like the wooden rudder below. By evening, just as doubt was creeping back into everyone's minds, a smudge appears on the horizon. Land, exactly where Caimana said it would be. An island, unmarked on any Portuguese chart. You anchor at the unmarked island as darkness falls, and immediately the medieval dangers of commerce replace the challenges of navigation. For this island harbours pirates who prey on trading vessels like yours. The attack comes at midnight. Swift, outrigger canoes surrounding the carrack like wolves around a wounded deer, their occupants climbing the hull with knives between their teeth. These aren't the noble Polynesian navigators of Caimana's tradition, but corrupted islanders who've learned that European ships carry gold and kill for it. The Portuguese crew fights with the desperation of medieval merchants defending their entire fortune. Crossbow bolts flying in the darkness, swords clashing against bone clubs. You watch Caimana caught between worlds. These pirates speak a dialect he understands, and he hears them planning to burn the ship after looting it. In a moment that defines his journey, he must choose between his island heritage and his sworn duty as navigator. He chooses duty, shouting warnings in Portuguese about the pirates' intentions, helping Alfonso organize the defense. The battle is brutal and medieval in its violence. Men dying over bags of false coins, others thrown overboard to drown in armor they wore for protection. By dawn, the pirates retreat, leaving blood on the deck, and a crew that now looks at Caimana with newfound respect. He saved them, not with navigation, but with the courage to bridge two worlds when survival demanded it. You sail from the pirate island, with half the crew wounded and everyone's trust in navigation shaken. But Caimana reads something in the morning swells that makes him deeply uneasy. A disturbance in the ocean's rhythm that speaks of greater dangers ahead. The ship's carpenter works frantically to repair damage from the battle, while the Portuguese count their losses. Several thousand false coins thrown overboard during the fight to lighten the load for combat. Alfonso discovers that his most trusted quartermaster had been slowly replacing real gold with counterfeit, a common medieval merchant's nightmare that could bankrupt an entire voyage. As Caimana studies the horizon, you notice him performing a ritual his grandfather taught him, casting small shells into the water and watching how they drift, reading messages in their patterns. "There's something wrong with the current," he tells Alfonso through the translator. It pulls us toward danger. The Portuguese want to ignore him, eager to reach the Spice Islands where fortune awaits. But the events of recent days have taught them respect for his insights. You feel the tension between medieval commerce's desperate greed and Polynesian navigation's patient wisdom, two systems of understanding the world that must somehow work together for anyone to survive. By noon, Kaimana's unease proves justified as they spot wreckage floating past, pieces of a ship that tried this route recently and failed, its cargo of precious cinnamon bark still fragrant as it floats among the splintered wood and torn sails.
You enter waters where medieval maps would have drawn sea monsters, and even Kaimana's ancestral knowledge grows thin. For these are the mixing zones, where different ocean systems collide unpredictably. The Portuguese crew has started a betting pool on whether they'll survive, using their remaining real coins to gamble on their own fate, a morbid medieval custom that at least keeps spirits from completely collapsing. Alfonso confides in you and Kaimana that he owes massive debts to Venetian bankers who will literally take his family's lives if this voyage fails. The brutal reality of medieval commerce, where a failed venture means more than bankruptcy. Kaimana responds by teaching him something unexpected: how to find fresh water in rainfall patterns, showing him how certain clouds always bring drinkable rain, while others carry only salt spray. Your people fear the ocean because you see it as enemy, Kaimana explains while fixing one of his cloth wind markers. But ocean is not enemy or friend. Ocean simply is, and we must learn its language. That night, as Portuguese sailors drink their rationed wine and tell stories of sea monsters that swallow ships whole, Kaimana sits apart, pressing his ear to the ship's hull, listening to sounds that travel through water from impossible distances. He hears something that makes him suddenly alert. The deep thrumming of a reef system that shouldn't exist, according to any charts, Portuguese or Polynesian. You wake before dawn to Kaimana's urgent whispers. The reef he heard is directly ahead, invisible in the darkness, but deadly as any medieval assassin's blade, waiting to tear the ship's hull into splinters. The Portuguese helmsman refuses to change course based on sounds only Kaimana claims to hear, leading to a confrontation that could end in mutiny. But you notice something remarkable. Dolphins have appeared, swimming in patterns around the ship, and Kaimana reads their movements like a merchant reads a contract. "They show us the safe path," he insists, pointing to how the dolphins consistently avoid certain areas of seemingly clear water. Alfonso must make a choice that no medieval merchant's training prepared him for: trust in ocean creatures and a young islander's interpretation, or follow the compass bearing that has served European navigation for centuries. The decision comes when the first pale light of dawn reveals white foam ahead, waves breaking over the reef, exactly where they would have sailed. The helmsman falls to his knees in shock, while Kaimana quietly adjusts their course to follow the dolphin's path through a channel invisible to European eyes, but clear as a road to someone who reads the sea's own signs. You pass through safely as the sun rises, revealing a reef system that stretches for miles, littered with the bones of ships whose navigators trusted only their instruments and not the ocean's living guides. You reach a stretch of ocean that Kaimana calls the desert of water, where for days nothing changes. No birds, no dolphins, no floating debris, just endless blue that drives medieval minds toward madness. The Portuguese crew begins to crack under the monotony, their superstitions growing wild as they interpret every cloud as an omen, every wave as a sign of divine displeasure. One sailor claims the ship is cursed because they trusted a heathen navigator, leading to a fight that leaves men bleeding on deck while precious water is used to clean wounds. Alfonso maintains order through a combination of threats and promises, the medieval merchant's toolkit of fear and greed. But you can see his own faith wavering. Kaimana remains steady, teaching those who will listen how to see subtle differences in the seemingly identical waves, how each swell carries information from different parts of the ocean. "Your Jesus walked on water," he tells a young Portuguese sailor
who still shows curiosity rather than fear. Perhaps he too knew how to read its messages. The comment nearly causes another fight, but Alfonso intervenes, recognizing that Caimana's steady presence is the only thing keeping complete panic at bay. By the 7th day in this liquid desert, even the wind seems to have forgotten them, and the sailors begin to speak openly of throwing Caimana overboard as a sacrifice to change their luck. You witness salvation arrive in the form of rain clouds that Caimana has been predicting for 2 days, though the Portuguese insisted no rain could come from such a clear sky. The clouds build with supernatural speed, turning noon into twilight, and suddenly the sky opens with violence that makes you understand why medieval sailors both prayed for and feared tropical storms. The crew scrambles to collect water in every container available, barrels, helmets, even boots, while Caimana shows them how to rig the sails to funnel maximum rainfall into their storage. The rain tastes sweet after weeks of rationed, stale water, and you see men crying with relief, even as they work frantically to secure everything against the wind. But this blessing comes with a price, as tropical rains bring tropical diseases, and within hours, several sailors begin showing signs of fever. The ship's medical knowledge consists mainly of bloodletting and prayer, medieval solutions that often hasten death rather than prevent it. Caimana shares what plant medicines he brought from his island, teaching Alfonso how to brew a tea that reduces fever, though the Portuguese eye it with suspicion even as it saves lives. By evening, the rain has passed, leaving the ship refreshed but vulnerable, water barrels full but crew weakened, the medieval fear of disease now replacing the fear of thirst. You realize this journey is teaching everyone aboard that survival requires abandoning old prejudices and embracing foreign wisdom. You sail into waters where the medieval world's worst nightmare becomes reality. A floating market of pirates and smugglers, a lawless city of ships where every transaction could end in death and every coin might be false. This is the Sangir Islands shadow trade, where stolen goods change hands beyond any nation's law, and Caimana's navigation skills matter less than Alfonso's ability to negotiate with thieves. The floating market appears at dawn like a wooden city on water. Chinese junks lashed to Arab dhows, Malay prahus tied to Portuguese caravels, all conducting business that would see them hanged in any civilized port. Alfonso must trade here for supplies, but the currencies are chaos. Spanish doubloons mixed with Chinese cash coins, Indian rupees alongside Dutch guilders, and most of them counterfeit. Caimana watches in fascination and horror as medieval commerce shows its darkest face. Men testing gold with their teeth, others cutting silver coins to check for lead cores, everyone armed and paranoid. A Javanese merchant offers them crucial supplies, but demands an impossible price, until Caimana surprises everyone by speaking in the man's own language, having learned it from his grandfather, who traded these waters generations ago. The negotiation that follows bridges not just languages, but centuries of mistrust, as Caimana helps Alfonso understand that in these waters, respect matters more than gold, and keeping your word is the only currency that never loses value. You leave the floating market with supplies, but also with unwanted passengers, rats that carry plague, stowaways seeking passage, and the attention of pirates who marked your ship as wealthy enough to rob, but vulnerable enough to take. Caimana feels the pursuit before anyone sees it, reading disturbances in the water that tell him fast ships follow in your wake, staying just beyond the horizon. The medieval game of cat and mouse begins, but played on water, where there's nowhere to hide except in wisdom. Alfonso wants to dump cargo to gain speed, the merchant's last resort, that means financial ruin but possible survival. Kaimana offers a different solution. He knows these waters contain a maze of reefs and shallows that larger ships can't navigate, but following his path requires absolute trust as he guides them by reading wave patterns invisible to European eyes. The ocean floor shapes the surface, he explains while directing subtle course changes. Deep water moves differently than shallow, and I can read the difference. The Portuguese crew watches in terror as he steers them toward what looks like certain destruction. Waters where waves break in strange patterns, and the color changes from deep blue to jade green. Behind them, the pursuing pirates suddenly veer off, knowing these waters mean death for ships without a true navigator. You pass through safely, Kaimana reading the ocean's depth by its color and movement. Medieval navigation charts useless in this realm of intuitive understanding. You anchor in a hidden cove that Kaimana found by following the flight patterns of seabirds, a sanctuary invisible from the main shipping lanes, where the crew can rest and repair. But this paradise hides medieval commerce's most insidious danger, not pirates or storms, but betrayal from within. The quartermaster Alfonso had trusted, despite his earlier counterfeiting, has been slowly poisoning the water supply with mercury, planning to kill everyone and claim the ship and cargo with confederates from the floating market. The plot is discovered when Kaimana notices silver droplets in the water barrel, his island upbringing making him familiar with natural mercury deposits and their dangers. The confrontation that follows is swift and brutal. Medieval justice delivered at sword point, the quartermaster thrown overboard to swim for shore or drown, his choice. Alfonso ages before your eyes, realizing that every person he trusts could be planning his death for the gold in the hold. In my islands, Kaimana tells him quietly, as they watch the traitor struggle toward shore. We have ways of knowing who to trust. We read people like we read the ocean, watching for patterns that reveal truth. The remaining crew performs a medieval ritual of renewed loyalty, each man swearing on religious relics they carry. But you can see in their eyes that trust, once broken, is harder to repair than any ship's hull. The voyage continues, but now everyone watches everyone. The paranoia of commerce poisoning relationships, like mercury poisoned their water. You sail through the night, following phosphorescent waves that glow like liquid starlight, a phenomenon that makes the Portuguese sailors whisper about sailing through heaven's reflection, their medieval minds struggling to comprehend the natural magic Kaimana takes for granted. These glowing waters, he explains, are filled with tiny life that lights up when disturbed, creating trails of green fire behind the ship that help him navigate even in darkness. The beauty masks danger. These waters also attract giant squid that hunt in the deep, and twice during the night, tentacles as thick as masts probe the ship's hull, searching for prey. Alfonso organizes defense with crossbows and boat hooks, while Kaimana does something unexpected. He sings. The song is ancient, taught by his grandmother, meant to calm the creatures of the deep, and whether by coincidence or true power, the tentacles withdraw. Everything in ocean has language, he tells the awestruck crew. Sometimes violence, sometimes song. By dawn, they've passed through the phosphorescent sea, but the experience has changed the crew's perception of their young navigator. He's no longer just a guide, but something closer to what medieval minds would call a sea wizard, though Kaimana would laugh at such a title. The Portuguese begin leaving small offerings at his sleeping place, coins and carved figures, trying to buy favor with forces they don't understand, but now deeply respect. You reach the halfway point of your journey at an island that appears on no medieval map, but has been known to Polynesian navigators for generations. A place where fresh water springs from volcanic rock and fruits grow wild among ancient stone carvings. The crew desperately needs this rest, half of them weakened by disease and poor nutrition, the medieval sailing diet of hardtack and salt pork having taken its toll, despite Kaimana's efforts to supplement with fish. On the island, you discover evidence of previous visitors, Chinese coins from dynasties past, Arabic inscriptions on stones, Malay fishing gear abandoned in caves, proving this has been a navigator's secret for centuries. Kaimana performs a ritual at a sacred spring, thanking the island's spirits for sanctuary, while the Portuguese fill every container with fresh water and gather fruits they've never seen before. Alfonso finds something troubling in a cave, the skeleton of a European sailor, still wearing Portuguese uniform from a generation past, clutching a leather journal that chronicles a similar voyage that ended in mutiny and murder. The discovery sends whispers through the crew about their own fate, but Kaimana points out something the dead man's journal missed, notes about ignoring island wisdom and trusting only European methods. He died because he wouldn't listen, Kaimana says, simply, and the lesson isn't lost on Alfonso, who orders his men to follow Kaimana's guidance about which fruits are safe and which waters to drink. You depart the sanctuary island with renewed supplies, but sail directly into the medieval merchant's recurring nightmare. A customs checkpoint run by corrupt officials who demand bribes that could bankrupt the entire voyage. This is the Sultanate of Brunei's outer patrol, where armed prahus surround your ship and officials come aboard with ledgers and scales, ready to tax every grain of spice and piece of gold. The head official, a man whose silk robes can't hide the pirate he used to be, speaks perfect Portuguese and knows exactly how vulnerable foreign merchants are in these waters. Alfonso begins the deadly dance of negotiation, trying to hide the true value of his cargo, while offering enough bribe to avoid having everything confiscated. Kaimana watches this medieval corruption with disgust, coming from a culture where trade was based on reciprocity and honor rather than theft disguised as law. But he notices something the others miss. The official keeps glancing at the sky, reading weather signs, and Kaimana recognizes the look of someone who knows a storm approaches. "Stall," he whispers to Alfonso. "Nature will solve this problem." The negotiation drags on as clouds build on the horizon, and when the storm winds begin, the official hurriedly accepts a smaller bribe and orders his boats to seek shelter. Your ship, with Kaimana reading the storm's path, finds safe harbor while the corrupt patrol boats, overloaded with confiscated goods from other merchants, struggle against waves that sink two of them before nightfall. You survive the storm, but emerge into waters where medieval maps write, "Here be dragons," and while no dragons appear, something worse does. The doldrums of the equator where wind dies completely, and the sun turns the ocean into a mirror of molten metal. For 3 days the ship doesn't move, sitting in heat so intense that tar melts from the deck seams and metal becomes too hot to touch. The Portuguese crew, already weakened, begins to hallucinate from heat and dehydration, seeing visions of home, of death, of sea monsters rising from the still water. Kaimana knows these waters from his grandfather's stories, the place where ocean currents converge and cancel each other out, where only patience and wisdom survive. He shows the crew how to create shade using wetted sails, how to fish in the stillness where fish gather in the ship's shadow, how to read the tiny ripples that promise wind will return. Alfonso, his medieval merchant's impatience burning hotter than the sun, wants to lower boats and row, but Kaimana explains this would kill the men faster than waiting. "Ocean tests us here," he says, creating a cooling compress from seaweed for a delirious sailor. "Not our strength, but our wisdom." On the 4th day, just as madness threatens to claim them all, Kaimana spots what he's been waiting for. A line of ripples approaching from the east, the leading edge of returning wind. You catch the returning wind like a blessing from heaven. but it carries you toward the most dangerous passage of your journey, the Strait of Malacca, where medieval commerce meets its deadliest challenge in waters so thick with pirates that honest merchants travel in convoys or not at all. Alfonso knows these waters by reputation, where Portuguese ships have been taken whole, crews enslaved, cargoes feeding a black market that stretches from India to China. But Caimana reads something different in the currents, patterns that tell him the strait's pirates follow predictable routes, hunting grounds determined by tides and seasons. They are like sharks, he explains. They patrol territories, and if we know their patterns, we can swim between them. The plan he proposes seems insane to medieval thinking. Travel at night without lights, navigating by stars and phosphorescence, moving when pirates expect merchants to anchor. Alfonso's navigator protests violently, declaring it impossible to navigate such dangerous waters in darkness. But Caimana's track record has earned him credibility that transcends traditional maritime law. As darkness falls, you begin the most terrifying passage yet, sliding through waters where every shadow could hide death, where Caimana reads the star's reflection in the water and guides the ship by touch and instinct. The crew holds collective breath for hours, and twice pirate ships pass so close you can hear their crews singing. But Caimana's route threads between danger like silk through needles. You emerge from the strait at dawn to find yourself in contested waters where Portuguese, Dutch, and Chinese merchants wage economic warfare through any means available, including hiring the very pirates you just avoided to attack their competitors. A Dutch float approaches flying friendship flags, but Caimana notices how it sits too high in the water for a cargo ship, meaning it's either empty or hiding weapons below deck. His warning saves the ship from what would have been a sophisticated trap. The Dutch vessel is crewed by pirates, wearing stolen uniforms, a common deception in these waters, where national flags mean nothing, and loyalty shifts with the tide. The chase that follows tests everything Caimana has taught the crew about reading wind and current, as the false Dutch ship has better sails. But Caimana knows these waters hide shortcuts through reef passages that appear only at certain tides. Now, he shouts, as the tide reaches its perfect point, steering toward what looks like solid reef, but opens into a channel just wide enough for your ship. The pursuing pirates, following too closely to stop, strike the reef that closes behind you as the tide shifts, their ship breaking apart on coral that Caimana read like a clock. Alfonso counts the saved cargo value against what bribes would have cost, the medieval merchant's arithmetic of survival, while Caimana simply thanks the ocean for revealing its secrets to those who listen. You reach the Spice Islands at last, those legendary Moluccas where nutmeg and cloves grow wild and fortunes are made or lost in single transactions. But the medieval marketplace here makes everything you've encountered seem like child's play. The harbour is a chaos of ships from every nation, merchants screaming in dozen languages, and the air so thick with spice dust that men sneeze blood. Alfonso must negotiate not just price, but survival, as rival merchants hire assassins as casually as they hire porters, and every meal could be poisoned by competitors. Caimana finds himself in the strangest position yet, teaching European merchants how to identify quality spices using Polynesian knowledge of plants. For his people have traded these waters longer than any European map has existed. The local sultan demands massive bribes just to allow trading, but also requires each ship to provide entertainment, leading to the surreal scene of Portuguese sailors attempting traditional dances while Caimana performs a Polynesian navigation chant that mesmerizes the court. Your ocean knowledge is worth more than gold here, the Sultan tells Kaimana through interpreters, offering him position and wealth to stay and teach Arabic sailors Polynesian navigation. The offer tempts. Safety, respect, wealth. Everything the dangerous voyage home won't guarantee. But Kaimana touches his jade pendant, remembering his grandfather's words about completing journeys once begun, and politely declines.
You depart the Spice Islands with holds full of worth kingdoms, but also with new dangers. Word has spread of your cargo, and every pirate, privateer and corrupt official between here and Portugal knows your route. The crew is delirious with dreams of wealth, calculating their shares with medieval mathematics that assumes everyone survives. Though Kaimana reads signs in the weather that suggest otherwise, a typhoon is building somewhere beyond the horizon, its presence felt in the way clouds move against prevailing winds and how the ocean swells come from directions that make no sense. We must find shelter within 2 days, Kaimana warns. But the only shelter means returning toward the pirates they just escaped. Alfonso faces the merchant's ultimate gamble. Risk the typhoon to protect the cargo, or seek safety and face human predators. The decision is made when Kaimana shows him something troubling. Seabirds flying inland in vast numbers, sharks swimming deep, every creature that knows the ocean fleeing something apocalyptic approaching. They turn toward a protected bay Kaimana remembers from ancestral stories, racing against time as the barometric pressure drops so fast that men's ears pop and blood vessels burst in their noses. The medieval crew prays to saints while Kaimana reads every sign nature provides, adjusting course constantly as the storm's outer bands begin to lash them with rain that falls horizontally and winds that turn the rigging into deadly whips. You reach the protected bay just as the typhoon's full fury arrives, and even in shelter, the storm's power defies medieval understanding of nature's limits. Waves taller than churches crash over the barrier reefs. Winds strip leaves from trees miles inland, and the rain falls so hard it's impossible to breathe facing upward. The ship, anchored with every chain and rope available, still drags toward shore until Kaimana directs them to a technique his people use, deliberately grounding the vessel at high tide, in a spot where it will be protected but can refloat when waters recede. The Portuguese crew thinks this is madness, but as other ships in the bay are torn from their anchors and destroyed, Alfonso's vessel remains stable, if traumatized. For 2 days the typhoon rages, and in the strange calm of its eye, Kaimana performs a ritual his grandmother taught him for surviving great storms, casting precious spices into the water as offering to the ocean spirits. The Portuguese laugh nervously at this paganism until the eye passes and they survive the storm's second half, while 3 Christian ships that refused such offerings are found later wrapped around trees inland. When finally the typhoon passes, leaving a world scoured clean and strange, half the crew kisses Kaimana's feet, while the other half crosses themselves and whispers about selling their souls to heathen gods. Alfonso just counts the intact spice barrels and calculates that survival supersedes theology. You sail from the typhoon's devastation into waters where exhaustion makes everyone vulnerable to the simplest dangers. And it's here that medieval commerce shows its cruelest face. Mutiny born not from anger but from greed. Half the crew, calculating that fewer survivors mean larger shares, begins plotting to throw others overboard during night watches, starting with Kaimana, whose foreign status makes him the easiest target. But the conspiracy fails because of something plotters didn't consider. Kaimana can read people like he reads the ocean, noticing how certain sailors avoid his eyes, how they cluster in groups that whisper and separate when he approaches. He warns Alfonso quietly, and together they prepare a counterplot, using medieval justice's harshest tools. When the mutineers make their move on a moonless night, they find the intended victims ready and armed, leading to a brief, vicious fight that ends with 5 conspirators dead and 3 more put in chains. Alfonso holds a trial at dawn,
using maritime law that gives captains absolute authority and sentences the survivors to be marooned on the next island, a death sentence delivered with legal pretense. Kaimana argues for mercy, his Polynesian culture viewing exile differently than execution. But Alfonso explains the medieval arithmetic of fear. If we show weakness now, others will try again, and next time we might not have your warnings. The island where they maroon the mutineers is visible for hours as you sail away, a brown smudge on the horizon that represents the price of greed.
You enter the Indian Ocean, where monsoon seasons determine everything, and Kaimana reads signs that they're sailing into the brief window between wind patterns when the ocean becomes unpredictable and deadly. The Portuguese navigator insists his charts show safe passage this time of year, but Kaimana trusts older knowledge, the way dolphins swim in agitated patterns, how the sunset turns unusual shades of copper, the feeling in his bones that matches his grandfather's descriptions of seasonal transitions. Within a day, his intuition proves correct, as winds begin shifting erratically, creating confused seas where waves come from multiple directions, making the ship buck and twist like a tortured animal. The medieval mind wants to read divine punishment in this chaos, and several sailors begin flagellating themselves, drawing blood to appease an angry god. Kaimana offers different wisdom. This is simply nature in transition, like a person tossing in sleep, and the solution is to move with the confusion rather than fight it. He teaches Alfonso to read micro-patterns in the chaos, finding brief corridors of consistency between conflicting currents. For 3 days they navigate this maritime madness, the ship's timbers groaning from stresses no shipwright anticipated, until finally they emerge into the stable trade winds of the established monsoon. The navigator, humbled, burns his charts for this region and asks Kaimana to teach him how to read seasons in the flight of birds and the color of sunsets.
You make port at Goa, the Portuguese stronghold in India, where European medieval commerce has built a fortress of greed and God on Asian shores, complete with inquisition chambers and counting houses side by side. Alfonso must report to the Portuguese governor and pay taxes that amount to legal piracy while defending his choice to trust a heathen navigator over Christian charts. The governor, a man who sweats wine and counts coins in his sleep, threatens to confiscate the entire cargo unless Kaimana converts to Christianity and swears fealty to the Portuguese crown. It's a moment where medieval religious authority meets ancient Pacific wisdom, and Kaimana's response surprises everyone. He agrees to attend Mass, but insists on also performing a Polynesian blessing for the church, claiming his gods and their god might be different faces of the same ocean. The theological debate that erupts would be comedic if lives didn't hang in the balance. Jesuit priests arguing with a young man who reads divinity in wave patterns rather than scripture. Finally, Alfonso intervenes with the only argument that matters in Goa. He offers a percentage of profits to the church if they let Kaimana remain unbaptized, the medieval solution where gold speaks louder than God. The governor agrees, counting future coins in his head, while Kaimana quietly performs his blessing anyway, sprinkling seawater on the church steps while whispering words in a language older than any European presence in these waters. You depart Goa with hold still full, but crew halved by disease, desertion and death, the medieval voyage extracting its toll in human currency that no amount of spice can repay. The remaining sailors are walking skeletons, their bodies consuming themselves after months of hardtack and salt meat, despite Kaimana's efforts to supplement with fish and fruit. As you round the Cape of Good Hope, that maritime graveyard where Atlantic meets Indian Ocean in a violence that has claimed more ships than any war, even Kaimana seems uncertain. These waters are beyond his ancestral knowledge, where Polynesian wisdom meets its limits, and European charts become necessary, despite their limitations. The Cape shows its teeth immediately. Waves from two oceans colliding create pyramidal seas that no ship should survive, while winds shift from gale to calm to gale within minutes. Alfonso's navigator, now humbled enough to work with Caimana rather than against him, combines their knowledge: European charts for the coastline, Polynesian wave reading for the currents. Together they thread a path through liquid mountains, the ship climbing waves so steep that men slide across the deck, then plunging into troughs so deep that the sky disappears. For 5 days they fight the Cape, and when finally they emerge into the South Atlantic, 20 more men are dead or dying. The medieval toll for attempting what shouldn't be possible. You limp into the South Atlantic, where Portuguese territory should mean safety, but instead brings new dangers. Colonial officials who've heard about your cargo and conspire to seize it through legal technicalities that would make medieval lawyers proud. At St. Helena, the governor boards with armed guards and declares your navigation illegal since Caimana isn't licensed by Portuguese maritime authority, threatening to impound everything unless impossible fines are paid. Alfonso erupts in rage that's been building for months, drawing his sword in the governor's face while screaming about rights earned in blood and storm. The confrontation escalates toward violence that would end with everyone dead, when Caimana intervenes with unexpected leverage. During the Spice Island negotiations, he memorized details about illegal trades the Sultan mentioned, trades involving this very governor. "I know about the slaves hidden in sugar barrels," he tells the governor quietly in Portuguese he's learned during the voyage, "and the Arab gold that never appears in official ledgers." The governor's face transforms from arrogance to fear as he realizes this primitive navigator holds secrets that could see him hanged. The attempted extortion becomes nervous cooperation, the governor suddenly eager to resupply the ship and send it away before Caimana can share his knowledge with higher authorities. You leave St. Helena with provisions, but also with understanding. Medieval commerce corrupts everything it touches, from Pacific Islands to Atlantic outposts. You sail north through Atlantic waters that Caimana finds disturbing in their emptiness. No islands to create wave patterns, no reefs to read, just vast blue, unmarked by the signatures he spent his life interpreting. The European sailors, sensing home waters approaching, become careless with excitement, but Caimana reads danger in their comfort. "Ocean doesn't forgive because you're close to home," he warns, noticing subtle signs of weather building that the Europeans miss in their anticipation. His prediction manifests as an Atlantic storm, different from Pacific typhoons, colder, meaner, with waves like moving mountains of grey-green ice. The ship, already weakened by the journey, begins breaking apart slowly. Planks working loose, caulking failing, water entering faster than exhausted men can pump. Alfonso makes the medieval merchant's last desperate choice. He orders the heaviest cargo thrown overboard to save the ship, watching a fortune in spices disappear into hungry waves. Each barrel jettisoned represents months of danger survived for nothing. But Caimana offers different perspective. Lives are the only cargo that matters reaching shore. The storm passes, leaving them floating but damaged, perhaps 2 weeks from Portugal, if the ship holds together, which increasingly seems unlikely. That night, as they pump water constantly to stay afloat, Caimana teaches the remaining crew a Polynesian song about voyages ending, about the ocean giving and taking in equal measure. You drift for days in failing winds with a dying ship. The Portuguese coast somewhere beyond the horizon, but unreachable if nature doesn't cooperate. And the crew begins final preparations that medieval sailors know too well. Men write wills on scraps of sailcloth, confessing sins to each other since no priest is aboard, dividing their theoretical shares of cargo that might never reach port. Alfonso maintains captain's authority through will alone, his body as broken as his ship, while the navigator finally admits that without Caimana, they would have died months ago, in waters no European chart could navigate. Kaimana himself grows quiet, feeling the journey's end approaching, in ways that transcend physical arrival. The ocean is releasing its hold on them, the waves carrying them rather than testing them. On the 10th day of drifting, he spots something the Europeans don't recognize, but fills him with wonder. A type of seaweed that only grows near certain coastlines, carried on currents that connect to shore. "Land within 2 days," he announces with certainty that seems impossible given the empty horizon. The crew, beyond hope, barely reacts, but Alfonso grips Kaimana's shoulder with tears in his eyes, understanding that this young islander has given him more than navigation. He's given him a new way of seeing the world. That night, Portuguese fishing boats find them, drawn by smoke from their signal fire. And suddenly, salvation arrives in familiar voices speaking their language. You reach Lisbon's harbour like ghosts returning from the dead. The ship so damaged it requires towing. The crew so skeletal that dock workers cross themselves and whisper about cursed voyages. The customs officials who board can't believe this wreck crossed 2 oceans. And when they see Kaimana, their medieval minds struggle to process how a Pacific islander became navigator for a Portuguese merchant vessel. The remaining cargo, though reduced, is still worth fortunes, and Alfonso's creditors transform from threatening his family to celebrating his genius. The medieval flip from creditor to debtor that determines whether you're hero or victim. But the real drama comes when the maritime court demands explanation for the unorthodox navigation, threatening to invalidate the voyage's profits, since it wasn't conducted according to Portuguese naval law. Kaimana stands before judges who've never left sight of land, trying to explain how water speaks and waves remember, concepts so foreign to medieval European thought that translators struggle to find words. Alfonso defends him with passion born from survival, telling the court that God works through many instruments, that perhaps divine providence sent this heathen navigator to save Christian souls. The theological argument that erupts reveals medieval Europe's deep confusion about worlds beyond its maps. But gold speaks loudest, and the prophets silence even the most dogmatic critics. You witness Lisbon trying to make sense of Kaimana's knowledge, as scholars and navigators seek audiences with him, offering gold for lessons in reading waves. But he struggles to teach what requires lifetime of feeling rather than weeks of learning. The Portuguese Academy of Navigation brings their finest instruments, their most detailed charts, trying to reduce his intuitive understanding to mathematical formulae that medieval minds can grasp. Kaimana patiently attempts to explain that the ocean isn't mathematics but conversation, that waves aren't measurements but messages, concepts that make learned men tear their beards in frustration. Alfonso, now wealthy beyond his dreams, offers Kaimana partnership in future voyages, but the young navigator feels the pull of home waters calling him back across the world. "Your people sail to take," Kaimana tells him gently. "My people sail to connect. These are different oceans even when they're the same water." The Portuguese king himself grants audience, curious about this navigator who succeeded where so many failed, and Kaimana presents him with a stick chart made from memory, explaining through interpreters how it maps not land, but the behavior of water itself. The king, whose medieval mind sees only bent sticks and shells, nods politely while missing the profound knowledge being offered freely. That night, Kaimana walks to the harbour and performs a ceremony of gratitude to the ocean. Watched by curious Portuguese who don't understand they're witnessing wisdom older than their civilization. You accompany Kaimana as he prepares for his return journey, but medieval Lisbon seems determined to keep him, offering positions, titles, wealth beyond any islander's dreams, trying to buy what can't be purchased, the ancient knowledge of reading the sea. The church attempts conversion with particular vigor, seeing opportunity to claim they've saved a soul while gaining navigation secrets. But Kaimana politely explains his gods live in the ocean itself and don't require buildings or books. Alfonso arranges passage on a ship heading to India, from where Kaimana can find his way home, and their parting carries weight, neither expected when this journey began. "You taught me commerce has many currencies," Alfonso says, presenting Kaimana with a fortune in gold coins. "But the most valuable thing you gave me can't be counted." Kaimana accepts only enough gold to ensure safe passage home, leaving the rest for Alfonso's family, understanding that wealth means different things in different worlds. The night before departure, Portuguese sailors who survived the voyage gather to honor him, each offering small gifts: a compass he'll never use, a cross he respects but doesn't need, maps of waters he knows better than cartographers. They've learned, these medieval merchants and sailors, that the world extends beyond their charts and calculations, that wisdom comes in forms they never imagined. As Kaimana boards his departing ship, the crowd at the dock includes nobles and commoners. All come to see the departure of the man who navigated by reading waves. You sail from Lisbon on a different ship with different crew, but Kaimana immediately reads familiar patterns in unfamiliar waters. The Atlantic speaking its own dialect of the universal ocean language he knows. The Portuguese captain of this vessel initially dismisses him as passenger, not navigator. But when Kaimana quietly mentions an approaching storm 2 days before clouds appear, attitudes shift from dismissal to curiosity. This crew hasn't heard the full story of his previous voyage, knowing only that he somehow guided a ship across impossible waters, and they watch him with medieval superstition mixed with desperate hope for similar fortune. As the predicted storm arrives, exactly when Kaimana said it would, the captain offers him unofficial position as advisory navigator, understanding that survival outweighs protocol. The voyage to India becomes a teaching journey, as Kaimana shares simplified versions of his knowledge with sailors who show genuine interest rather than greed. He teaches them to watch birds, not just as land indicators, but as weather prophets, to feel ships' movements as communication from currents below, to respect the ocean as living entity, rather than empty highway. One young sailor, barely 16, shows particular aptitude for understanding these lessons, and Kaimana sees in him the possibility that this knowledge might bridge cultures after all. By the time they reach the Indian Ocean, half the crew has learned to read basic wave patterns, a small victory for ancient wisdom in the modern world. You reach the Indian Ocean where Kaimana's knowledge fully returns, these waters connected to his Pacific home through currents that carry memories across vast distances, and he begins to read signs of his own islands, though they're still months away. The ship stops at Ceylon for supplies, where Kaimana discovers a community of Malay traders who've preserved navigation techniques similar to his own, proving that ocean wisdom transcends single cultures. These traders share stories of the Portuguese disrupting ancient trade routes, forcing commerce into patterns that ignore natural currents and seasonal winds, causing more shipwrecks, as medieval greed overrides ancestral knowledge. Kaimana spends his gold not on passage, but on gifts for these knowledge keepers, understanding that wisdom preserved is worth more than wealth accumulated. An old Malay navigator, scarred from decades at sea, recognizes the jade pendant Kaimana wears and reveals it once belonged to a legendary navigator who could find islands in empty ocean, Kaimana's own great-grandfather, whose voyages reached further than family stories ever told. This connection across generations and cultures moves Kaimana to tears, understanding that he's part of a navigation tradition that stretches back to when humans first trusted themselves to the sea. The old man gives him a gift, a small piece of magnetite that always points north, not to replace his wave reading, but to complement it. showing that different navigations can support rather than compete with each other. You leave Ceylon on a Malay prahu whose captain knows the old ways, sailing not by Portuguese charts, but by monsoon patterns and star positions. Methods that complement Kaimana's wave reading perfectly. The crew is a mixture of cultures, Malay, Arab, Chinese, Indian, all united by understanding that the ocean belongs to no single nation despite European claims. They sail through waters where Portuguese patrols demand papers and permissions, but the captain navigates around these obstacles, using knowledge of currents and weather that European ships can't match. Kaimana finds himself teaching again, but this time to students who already understand that navigation is more than instruments and mathematics. A Chinese sailor shows him how to use clouds' reflections to find land beyond horizons, while an Arab navigator shares techniques for reading stars through cloudy nights. This exchange of knowledge feels like the ocean itself, different currents mixing to create something stronger than any single flow. As they approach the waters where Pacific and Indian Oceans merge, Kaimana begins to recognize specific swell patterns he learned as a child. Messages from his home islands traveling thousands of miles through water to guide him back. The international crew performs a ceremony as they cross into Pacific waters, each culture contributing prayers and offerings, understanding they're witnessing something sacred, a navigator returning home, using knowledge that predates all their civilizations. You enter true Pacific waters, where Kaimana's entire being resonates with recognition. Every wave pattern familiar as childhood lullabies, every current carrying stories his grandfather told, and he knows exactly where he is, without needing to see land for weeks. The Malay captain watches in amazement as Kaimana navigates through seemingly empty ocean with absolute certainty, finding small islands exactly where he predicts, reading the sea like others read written words. They stop at islands where Polynesian navigators gather, and Kaimana's return creates sensation. He's the one who sailed with Europeans and survived, who learned their ways without losing his own, who proved ancient navigation could guide modern ships. Elders examine him for signs of corruption, worried that European influence might have damaged his ability to read the ocean, but find instead that his knowledge has deepened through testing against different waters. Young navigators gather to hear his stories, especially about waters beyond their traditional routes. And Kaimana realizes his journey has prepared him to be a bridge between worlds. He shares what he learned about Atlantic storms and Mediterranean currents, about reading unfamiliar waters using fundamental principles, expanding Polynesian navigation knowledge while preserving its core wisdom. The Malay captain offers to wait and carry him the final distance home, but Kaimana politely declines. This last portion of the journey must be made in traditional way, in an outrigger canoe, approaching his island as his ancestors did. You join Kaimana in a traditional outrigger canoe for the final leg home, accompanied by two young navigators who want to learn from his unique experience, sailing through waters where every wave brings memories flooding back, stronger than storm swells. The canoe, so different from the Portuguese carack, responds to the ocean like a living thing, dancing with waves rather than fighting them. And Kaimana realizes how much he missed this harmony during months on European ships. They pass islands where news of his return has already spread through the navigator network that predates any postal system, and people gather on beaches to wave and sing traditional welcomes. But Kaimana also sees changes. European ships anchored in lagoons that were once pristine, trading posts established where sacred sites stood, his world already transforming from the medieval commerce he helped facilitate. The young navigators ask if he regrets guiding the Portuguese through these waters, potentially opening routes for exploitation, but Kaimana offers wisdom earned through hardship. The ocean connects all lands, whether we guide ships or not. Better to teach respect than let ignorance destroy. On the second night, they encounter a storm that would terrify European sailors. but the outrigger rides it like a bird on wind, proving that indigenous technology, perfectly matched to environment, surpasses foreign innovations. As dawn breaks, Kaimana sees the mountain peaks of his home island, exactly where his internal navigation said they would be, and begins the traditional chant of return that his grandfather taught him. You arrive at Kaimana's home island as the entire village gathers on the beach, his mother weeping with joy, while his grandfather Makoa stands quietly, reading in Kaimana's bearing the weight of knowledge gained and innocence lost through his unprecedented journey. The welcome ceremony mixes celebration with solemnity, for while Kaimana returns as hero, he also brings news of changes coming that no island can escape. The medieval world of commerce and conquest has discovered the Pacific, and isolation is no longer possible. That evening in the sacred meeting house, Kaimana tells his complete story to the assembled navigators and elders, speaking for hours about Portuguese merchants who risk everything for spices, about waters where no islands exist to create wave patterns, about storms that come from cold rather than heat. Makoa listens with particular attention to descriptions of how European navigation works, understanding that knowing their methods is essential for surviving their expansion. You have brought us difficult gifts, the old navigator says, knowledge that we need but wish we didn't need. Kaimana presents the treasures he's brought, not gold, which he left mostly with Alfonso, but navigation tools from different cultures, maps showing how Europeans see the world, and, most importantly, understanding of medieval commerce's strengths and weaknesses. The village celebrates through the night, but Kaimana sits apart with Makoa, teaching his grandfather about compass readings and chart mathematics, ensuring this foreign knowledge joins their ancestral wisdom. You witness Kaimana's new role as he becomes not just navigator but translator between worlds, teaching his people how to read European intentions in their ship movements while preserving the ancient ways of reading the ocean itself. Portuguese ships begin arriving more frequently, seeking the navigator who guided Alfonso's miraculous voyage, offering fortunes for his services. But Kaimana negotiates differently now, demanding respect for sacred sites, fair trade rather than exploitation, and most importantly, that European navigators learn from Polynesian wisdom rather than replacing it. He establishes a school where young islanders learn both navigation systems, understanding that survival requires knowing your enemy's tools while maintaining your own. Alfonso's ship returns after 2 years, the Portuguese merchant keeping his promise to trade fairly, and the reunion shows how respect can bridge even the vast gulf between medieval commerce and Pacific wisdom. Alfonso has aged greatly, the successful voyage making him wealthy, but also wise to costs beyond gold. And he brings gifts that matter: books for learning European writing, instruments for understanding their navigation, and, most surprisingly, his young son, whom he wants Kaimana to teach. Teach him to read the ocean, Alfonso asks, not just charts, but the living water itself. This request represents a profound shift, European recognition that their navigation might learn from, rather than replace indigenous knowledge. Kaimana accepts the boy as student, beginning the long work of creating navigators who belong to both worlds. You observe the years passing as Kaimana transforms from young navigator to elder teacher, his school producing navigators who can read both wave patterns and compass bearings, who understand that medieval commerce and ancient wisdom need not be enemies but can be woven together like the strands of a rope, each strengthening the other. His students spread across the Pacific, some sailing with European traders as navigators and translators, others maintaining pure traditional routes that keep ancestral knowledge alive, all carrying the lesson that the ocean belongs to everyone and no one. Alfonso's son becomes his finest student, eventually sailing home to Portugal carrying Polynesian navigation techniques that slowly transform European understanding of the sea. The Portuguese Academy finally acknowledges what they couldn't understand before, that mathematics and intuition, charts and feelings, instruments and instincts are all part of navigation's complete picture. Kaimana grows old watching the ocean from the same beach where Makoa first taught him to feel vibrations through sand, teaching his own grandchildren now. passing on knowledge that has grown richer through its journey across the world. On calm evenings, he tells stories of medieval merchants who risked everything for spices, of pirates and storms, of waters where different oceans meet and mix their messages. The jade pendant now hangs around his granddaughter's neck, ready for whatever journeys await, carrying the memory of voyages that proved wisdom transcends culture. The place home, money which you stelling commons, you runs for the comments that rive around, and seen, they not all o coal. As you watch the sunset over waters that connect all lands, Kaimana performs the evening ritual his grandfather taught him, thanking the ocean for its lessons, knowing that every wave carries stories between shores, that navigation is ultimately about connection, not conquest.
As Kaimana's story gently fades into the rhythm of eternal waves, you feel yourself drifting back to your own time, carrying with you the wisdom of navigators who read the ocean's own handwriting. The medieval world of dangerous commerce, where merchants risked everything for spices and gold, seems distant now, softened by the passage of centuries into bedtime story. Your breathing has matched the rhythm of those ancient swells that carried messages across impossible distances. The Portuguese traders with their fears and greed, the pirates and storms, the corruption and courage, all have become gentle whispers in your mind, no more threatening than shadows on your bedroom wall. Feel yourself safe in your modern comfort, where navigation means clicking buttons and commerce flows safely through electronic streams. No bandits wait on your roads, no pirates threaten your journey, no storms test your ability to read nature's signs. You're protected, warm, secure. The ocean that Kaimana knew still moves in its eternal patterns, waves still carrying messages for those who know how to listen. But for you, tonight, those waves exist only to rock you gently into deepest sleep. Let his wisdom settle into your dreams, like sand settling in still water, peaceful and complete. Your journey across centuries and oceans is ending now. Rest knowing that brave navigators once read the sea like sacred text, that medieval merchants faced their fears for fortune, that knowledge transcends cultures when respect guides the way. Sleep now, gentle traveler. The waves will carry you safely through the night.